Welcome to This Explainer. Okay, I am absolutely thrilled you're here today because we're going to tackle one of the most misused, misunderstood, and frankly overused buzzwords in the entire business world. I'm talking about strategy. I mean, everybody uses it, right? People say they have a social media strategy or a hiring strategy or a lunch strategy. But today, we're taking brilliant frameworks from foundational thinkers. We're talking Michael E. Porter, Roger Martin, Felix Oberholzer-Gee, and we're going to literally dismantle those preconceived notions. We're rebuilding your understanding of what strategy actually is, right from the ground up. So here's our roadmap. First, we'll hit the great strategy misconception, then choosing your strategic position, moving into trade-offs, what not to do, creating perfect strategic fit, and finally, the value stick framework. Let's dive right in. Section 1, the great strategy misconception. We're going to look at the two biggest traps that companies fall into when they think they're being strategic. Let's look at the first trap. Roger Martin brilliantly points out the difference between planning and strategy. Look, planning, it's comfortable. It's basically a predictable list of things you control. You know, we're going to build a factory. We'll hire 10 people. We'll launch this new product. It's all about costs you can actively manage. Strategy, on the other hand, focuses on outcomes you literally do not control, specifically whether customers actually decide to buy your offering over the guy down the street. And because you can't prove in advance what a customer is going to do, strategy causes angst. It makes managers super nervous. But you got to remember, a comforting list of spending activities, that is not a theory on how to win. Which brings us to the second trap, defined by the legendary Michael E. Porter as operational effectiveness, or OE. Now, OE basically means performing similar activities better than your rivals do. So maybe you reduce defects, maybe you adopt the absolute latest software, or you manufacture just a little bit faster. Sounds pretty great, right? Well, here's the massive warning label on that. Simply adopting best practices is not a strategy. Porter makes a crucial distinction here. If you rely only on operational effectiveness, like doing similar things better, you're really just doing the exact same things as your competitors, just sweating it out, trying to be slightly better at it. And what happens? Well, everybody benchmarks each other, everyone outsources to the exact same vendors, and you just end up in this exhausting zero-sum race to the bottom where nobody wins and prices just plummet. But strategic positioning, that is about doing different things or doing similar things in fundamentally different ways. That right there is how you actually lock in a sustainable competitive advantage. Section 2, choosing your strategic position. If strategy is all about being unique, we absolutely have to understand exactly where that uniqueness comes from. Porter breaks down 3 distinct sources of positioning to stake out your playing field. First up, we have variety-based positioning. This is when you only produce a very specific subset of products or services. Think Jiffy Lube. They are not replacing your transmission, they just do really fast oil changes. Second is needs-based. This is serving all the specific needs of a highly targeted group. IKEA is the classic example here. They target young, cost-conscious buyers who are totally fine assembling their own furniture. And third is access-based positioning, where you segment by geography or scale. Carmike Cinemas pulled this off perfectly by operating exclusively in cities with populations under 200,000. Basically, they went to the places the big theaters totally ignored. Section 3. Trade-offs. What not to do. Because hey, staking a claim isn't enough. You have to defend it. Michael E. Porter famously said, "The essence of strategy is choosing what not to do." Just let that sink in for a second. Without trade-offs, any brilliant idea you come up with would just be immediately copied by your competitors. If you try to be all things to all people, you end up being nothing to anyone. You literally have to make the agonizing choice of what you are going to actively ignore. So what happens when you refuse to make those hard trade-offs? Well, just look at Southwest Airlines compared to Continental Lite. Southwest had massive success with a pure laser-focused strategy, point-to-point routes, only flying 737s, and absolutely no meals. Well, Continental Airlines saw this and tried to do what we call straddling. They launched Continental Lite to copy Southwest, but, and here's the kicker, they refused to make the hard trade-offs. They kept their mixed fleet of aircraft, they kept their complex hub-and-spoke system on other routes, and they tried to keep travel agents but cut their commissions. The result? Total unmitigated disaster. Flights were constantly delayed, customers were furious, Continental lost hundreds of millions of dollars, and the CEO was fired. Trying to do the whole shebang guarantees failure. Section 4, creating perfect strategic fit. Okay, so you've made your hard trade-offs. How do you completely lock out the imitators? A lot of folks think strategy is just a fancy collection of core competencies. Actually, scratch that. It's not. Strategy is how your entire system of activities interlocks. Fit locks out imitators because it creates a chain that is quite literally as strong as its strongest link.
If a competitor wants to copy you, they can't just cherry-pick one cool feature. They'd have to replicate your entire interconnected system, which is basically impossible.
Porter breaks this down into 3 types of strategic fit. Step 1 is first-order fit. This is simple consistency. Take Vanguard. They minimize costs in literally everything they do. No fancy corporate offices, no broker commissions. Step 2 is second-order fit, where activities actively reinforce each other. Neutrogena puts their specialized soap in luxury hotels. The hotel gets a premium brand, and Neutrogena gets incredible, practically free marketing that drives drugstore sales back home. Step 3 is third-order fit. This is the holy grail, complete optimization of effort. The Gap optimizes its supply chain to restock basic clothing almost daily, which virtually eliminates the need for massive, wasteful in-store inventory backrooms. When your activities interlock perfectly like a giant puzzle, your competitive advantage compounds. Section 5, the value stick framework. Now, we're going to pivot from Porter's positioning to a truly fantastic visual framework by Felix Oberholzer-Gee. This framework shows us exactly how a great strategy mathematically creates value. Imagine a physical stick. At the very top of this stick is willingness to pay, or WTP. That's the absolute maximum a customer will hand over before saying no thanks and walking away. Now, at the very bottom of the stick is willingness to sell, or WTS. This is the absolute bare minimum an employee will accept to work for you, or a supplier will accept to sell you their parts. The total value your company creates, it's the entire distance between the top of that stick and the bottom. And your company's profit margin sits comfortably right there in the middle. So here's the really crucial takeaway. To make your strategy succeed, you literally only have 2 levers to pull. You either push up willingness to pay at the top, or you pull down willingness to sell at the bottom. To raise willingness to pay, you improve quality, or maybe add complementary products. Like how buying an expensive espresso machine magically increases your willingness to pay top dollar for those little coffee capsules. You can also leverage network effects. But the bottom of the stick, that is where it gets fascinating. If you just pay employees more, you're not actually creating value. You're just shifting it from the company's pocket to the staff's pocket. But if you make the job a better job, like offering better training, more flexibility, making them actually feel successful, their willingness to sell their time to you goes down. You actually mathematically create tangible value. Let's look at a real-world example. $1 billion. That's enough to make anyone's stomach drop, right? That is the massive amount of money the electronics retailer Best Buy lost in a single quarter about a decade ago. Everyone, and I mean everyone, thought they were going to get crushed by Amazon. But then, a new CEO stepped in and applied these exact value stick principles to mount one of the most historic turnarounds in retail. Let's see exactly how they pulled this off. Best Buy yanked on both levers of that stick. First, they raised customers' willingness to pay by turning every single physical store into a local shipping warehouse, which drastically sped up delivery times. Then, they lowered willingness to sell for their vendors. Instead of just buying inventory the old way, they went to Samsung and Apple and said, hey, you can build these beautiful store-in-store setups right inside Best Buy for a fraction of what it costs to build your own freestanding stores. Brilliant, right? Finally, they lowered willingness to sell for their employees by letting them specialize. So instead of a worker having to know a tiny bit about everything in the store, an employee became the dedicated Microsoft expert. Their job suddenly became easier, they felt way more successful, and employee engagement just skyrocketed. The result of all this? Best Buy went from bleeding $1 billion to achieving a return on invested capital exceeding 20%, a real game changer. Which brings us to our conclusion, the growth trap. You've found your unique position, you've made your agonizing trade-offs, and you've maximized your value stick. But there is a final, super insidious threat lurking right around the corner. The desire to grow is the most perverse threat to strategy. I know, that sounds totally counterintuitive, doesn't it? But the relentless pressure to constantly grow revenues tempts companies to start blurring their unique positions. You start adding little features you probably shouldn't, you try to attract customer segments you'd used to intentionally ignore, and you start mimicking your rivals. Before you know it, you've slowly undone all your strategic fit, and you're just another average, indistinguishable company caught back in that zero-sum race to the bottom. So I want to leave you with this final thought. If strategy truly means choosing what not to do, what is your core of uniqueness? Look closely at your business. What are the barnacles? Those incremental, compromise-driven additions that you need to scrape away right now to rediscover your uncopyable core. Strategy isn't about doing everything, it's about making the hard choices to be uniquely brilliant at one specific thing.
Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep making those hard choices, and we'll see you next time.